The Congress of Business and Economics held its 7th annual Economist review at Ozzys Kitchen in Wynberg. The highly anticipated event brings together thought leaders, business leaders, politicians, and economists together as the economy of the country is unpacked. With the political landscape going through a seismic shift in South Africa following the 2024 national elections, the event will highlight what well-known and senior economists Fuad Cassim and Goolam Ballim feel about the trajectory the economy will take over the new 5 years.
As the Congress of Business and Economics, we're absolutely delighted to be hosting what is to be our 7th edition of an annual economic review that we have. Over the years, we've always had top economists giving a review of the current political, economic landscape and how they see things panning out. And this year is specifically interesting because we have a government of national unity. So the two economists is the head of Standard Bank's economic department, Goolam Ballim, and the former advisor to the Minister of Finance, Fuad Cassim. So we're looking forward to them unpacking a political and economic scenario and how it pans out for South Africa going forward, and how, as the delegates, we have a full house tonight, and the delegates, mainly business professional people, how they can plan in terms, scenario planning in terms of what the economists will unpack.
Confucius says there are 3 things necessary for government: weapons, food, and trust. If a ruler cannot hold on to all 3, he should give up weapons first, food next, and trust should be guarded to the end. Without trust, we cannot stand. Now that's very meaningful, it's very powerful. And what has happened, if you look at globally, if you look at the situation globally, what has happened is trust in democratic institutions has declined. Trust in the global market economy has dropped, and trust in political and economic elites has also vanished. I don't mean to insult any of you in the political spectrum, but it has vanished globally and domestically. And that is something we have to confront.
I think you can break South Africa's political narrative into, as I've suggested, 4 chapters. And each chapter can be described with just one word. I would say that the first chapter can be described with a single word: reconciliation, followed by institutions. The third chapter, impunity. And the 4th chapter, reform. So just 4 words, I think, give flesh to describing the last 3 decades. I think we know well, Nelson Mandela gave us reconciliation. He gave us the image that people across races could find common cause and forge a shared prosperity. And I think we can safely say that was priceless. More colloquially, we didn't resort to killing each other across race groups. The former President Thabo Mbeki era I describe as one of institutions. I would readily submit that the institutional fabric of South Africa was imperfect. It certainly did have its shortcomings, its fissures. But the political center held during that era, and broadly speaking, institutions held.
There is a level of increased sentiment that is enveloping this new political arrangement. Essentially, the prospects of South Africa will hinge on a few elements. I think firstly, there is this anticipation that the political center will hold, and the government of national unity is instrumental in that respect. In other words, this new government of national unity is South Africa's reinvented broad church. The second element relates to the reforms. Reform measures that have already been in play for more than a year now, related to power, transportation, and increasingly new spheres such as local government, technology, and also the reform cabinet and new ministers in new portfolios, giving reform impetus to their respective areas.
The results from the governing party were, I think, much worse than expected. And of course, getting 40% was particularly low, and that could have led to quite fundamental instability. And I always use the example of the Gauteng metros, where no party has received, absolute majorities. That's created quite a lot of instability. We know in Joburg there's a lot of instability at the moment. As you can see, the mayor might be removed anytime soon. Ekurhuleni, there have been some developments there, and Tshwane as well. So I think that the fact that the government was able to conceive of this idea of a GNU, bringing together the second, the opposition party, in effect, and other little parties together, has created a lot of coherence at a national level.
There's differing views on the government of national unity, because on the one hand, as a democracy, we're not as yet matured enough to be able to deal. It's a new terrain. And if we look at Gauteng, where over the past years where we had I would probably call it a failed coalition with different parties, and I'm hoping that this does not transcend into national politics. The mood is very buoyant out there. We were at the opening of Parliament and speaking to many of the politicians that were present there as well. They all were buoyant to say that, at this moment in time, we're speaking, we're listening to each other. Let's hope that happens, because it could be very fragile at the same time as well. We're not as yet matured enough for this type of politics as some of our European counterparts are.
It is true that there are both ideological and policy distinctions between the various parties. However, I suspect there's enough glue, particularly with regard to the ANC of President Ramaphosa and, for example, the Democratic Alliance in terms of, say, good governance, and a fixation, for example, on getting the economy to grow through an investment drive.
So if you look at the recent election in South Africa, what has happened? And the question is, has South Africa bucked the trend? And in some ways it has. It is pregnant with a lot of risks and a lot of dangers. But one thing South Africa has done or achieved is that it's produced a democratic outcome. The voice of the electorate has spoken. This is why the former governing party is in power with a very reduced majority, and that is very significant.
In economics school, one of the first lessons that they will give you is to suggest that the recipe for economic growth incorporates 4 elements. Just 4 elements. Physical capital, financial capital, human capital, and innovation. If you meld those 4 elements together, you will generate growth. And that thesis, that theory held during the 80s, during the 90s. And it's what Fuad taught me. More latterly, it's come to fruition that if anything, the rule of law undergirds everything. The rule of law accounts for even more than those 4 elements, the 3 capital types and innovation in supporting growth. And I want to be a little bit more precise, a little bit more numerate. I can comfortably say that 75% of the reasons 150 economies around the world have been able to achieve high income status, 75% is explained by robust rule of law. A mere 25% is explained by capital and innovation. Put differently, you can pour all the capital and mix it, pepper it with really cutting-edge innovation. But if you don't have a semblance of rule of law, you'll be building a house on quicksand. And that is a clear message from, as I've suggested, the study of 150 countries around the world.
Thanks again, Fuad and Goolam, for a great presentation. There's a big debate on the NHI. And I know, Goolam, you stopped just before that point. I know time was an issue, but I'd love to hear your view just on what could happen, what may happen. I don't know if we follow in the UK model. I'm just curious on how it's going to actually unfold.
What's the appetite amongst the labor unions? I mean, they're hardly playing a constructive developmental role. It's like they are rear guard, backward force, stuck with ideology. But if you don't get private sector, labor, and civil society into this involvement of national dialogue with the government, I can't see this 5 years really holding.
More people involved in our economy and employed is always better for business, it's better for our economy. And as a leader of society, I think the call and the change in the demographics of our elections shows the desperate need for change when it comes to the impoverished and those who are marginalized. So how do we anticipate that as we look at those reforms that were outlined by Goolam, what is the impact, outside of the 350,000 jobs, what would be the direct impact on the impoverished and the people who are living in poverty?
What's the chances of the GNU falling apart? I think I've answered that. I hate to speculate about people, about Paul Mashatile. I'm not privy to those conversations. I don't know, and I can't speculate. Sorry. Maybe Khatija could answer that question. I think democracy, to overcome trust deficit, you need more discussion. Now, some may argue we've had lots of discussion, we've got lots of plans, we've got lots of policies, nobody damn well does anything about it. But okay, that's one thing. But you do need discussion in any conflictual situation. So I think democracy by discussion, I think this is what Aristotle, this is what Plato, this is what they talked about in their discourses.
We now have 27, 28 million social welfare beneficiaries after COVID, right? So 27 million people or so get some form of benefit, old age grant, child orphan grant, NSFAS grant, whatever it is, the plethora of social, 27 million people. But it rests on a pinhead. About 400,000 South Africans contribute 50% of all taxes. So you have this lopsided contribution amongst less than 500,000 South Africans carrying more than half of the tax base, and 27 million beneficiaries who are nominal contributors to the tax base. I don't say that in a despising way. I say it from a reflection that if we don't get growth, we're not going to get growth in our revenues.
Thank you, one and all. Good night. God bless. Safe journey. See you again.
This brings an end to yet another impressive event brought to you by the CBE. The new dawn of Goolam Ballim aptly put it. It's bringing a sense of hope and expectation to an economy which unfortunately has stagnated over the past 7 years.